Thank you. I want to introduce you to my mom. She is a real character. Always was, always the loudest person in the room. So back in high school, I was right before my senior year of high school. She caught a rare brain disease called encephalitis and had a couple of side effects. But one of the side effects was she lost a good chunk of her memory, which it was essentially like somebody formatting part of her brain and sort of erasing it. So she lost probably about 20 years of her memory, which included the memory of having two of her children. And so the other side effect from the disease was she would have seizures and periodic, not grand mal seizures, but sort of mild seizures. So this is a journal that my dad took of her seizures. He would write all of these down to get ready for doctor's appointments. And it was an incredibly interesting time and certainly a defining moment in my life. Although we rallied, it was kind of a difficult process. One is that when you're faced with something like that, nobody is really prepared for it. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money. She couldn't be left alone because she would have the seizures. So she was a young, strong-headed woman, 47 years old at the time, and then couldn't be left alone. So I've come to the conclusion, that was over 22 years ago, but the conclusion that I've come to since, through all the people that I've met, is that a good chunk of us are probably going to face an unexpected thing to happen to us. You know, who knows? Maybe a relative gets cancer, or it could be that a child is disabled, or maybe even you lose your job and you face eviction. And we really don't know. Nobody really prepares you for this until you're in that situation. And so in the U.S., I live in Austin, Texas, and all of the basic human services are covered by government for things to sort of keep you alive, whether it be food. So if your income is really low, there's a very generous food stamp program. There's also Medicaid if you don't have health insurance and your income is very low in some states. But the far majority of what I'm defining as human services are actually provided by charities, NGOs, and religious organizations. So if you are in that situation, the real question is, where do you start? So the process for finding and enrolling in social services is quite chaotic, and I'll get into some of my theories as to why. And I think this is probably generous for anybody who's sort of experienced getting somebody enrolled in one of these programs. But what happens a lot of times is people don't know what's available, so they tend to give up along the way. So they may suffer unnecessarily. So I started asking the question, why is this process so chaotic? So probably for the last 12 years, I've been working on those exact problems in some way, shape, or form. So going back, there's actually two sides to this sort of mystery as I see it. The first is, how do you find the services that are available? Who knows? Maybe you're looking for a job training program and you got laid off from a factory in your town and you just need to learn computer skills. There are resources out there that'll help you do that, and it's usually free, paid for by an NGO. The second part of the problem, and sort of that big maze, is how do you apply for these services? So I'm going to walk through these. So just to give you a little bit of background, let's look at the first problem, finding those services. If you do a Google search in Austin, Texas for senior care, so maybe you have a relative you're taking care of that's a senior, you'll get 51 million results, with the first few of those results showing ads for things like that. So knowing this, and believe me, over 22 years, search has gotten a lot better, certainly. But in 2010, I started Aunt Bertha, which is a fast, friendly, and simple way to find government and charitable programs. So I literally was a programmer in a past life, and then was a management consultant helping social service organizations, government social service organizations, and started writing code again. And this is what happens. So once you put in your postal zip code, it actually immediately pulls in all of the government and charitable services in your area. These are things like, maybe you're emigrating to the country and you can't afford a lawyer. How do you find legal services? Or maybe you're looking for a bus pass or maybe a support group. The other thing that we started to see is that there's some highly specialized programs for highly specialized situations. So for example, here's a program that will build a wheelchair ramp on your house. Now, all of us have known somebody who's maybe gone through a car accident or maybe recovering from major surgery. This way, if you can't afford it, the city of Austin will actually build a wheelchair ramp for you on your house so that you can recover in your house with your family rather than go to a nursing home, which is ultimately more expensive to society. And one of the really cool things is that anonymously, you can actually punch in your own income into the search, and we can tell you which government or charitable programs that you qualify for. So for example, a family of 4 making $1,000 a month can qualify for $368 in food stamps in the state of Texas. And that all happens anonymously in just a few seconds. Shortly after we launched our search in 2011, we started to see and we started to track search results. And we're seeing searches for all sorts of things. We see basic needs searches, things that we take for granted. For example, in Virginia, we saw a search for a woman looking for tampons. Presumably, she ran out of money and couldn't afford it. And for somebody in that situation, that's an important thing at that time. We see parents of disabled children looking for support groups. We see veterans looking for veteran services. We also see searches where we don't have results. And so our team really looks at these, and we see, for example, in Texas 2012, we saw a bunch of searches for things like free fans, air conditioner repair, utility assistance. And what we found is that in some cities, there weren't any results. So we looked at it, and that we just sort of rolled up our sleeves and started researching and calling, and then we indexed all of those utility assistance programs. So the search engine actually gets smarter over time as we add more information, but as people suggest that information. We're also seeing what-if scenarios. So there are call centers in a lot of US cities where you can call to find out, maybe you're in an extreme crisis and maybe you want help with something. But what if you're at work and you're a single mother or a single father and you see a couple of people come in that look like consultants, and all of a sudden you have an irrational fear, oh, I'm going to get laid off. Well, we see people doing searches that basically say, I'm going to be laid off. Will my kids have health insurance? And it eases their anxiety, and those are some of the lessons we learned. Over time, we started to run some reports, and we started to provide those reports to community leaders. On your left, this is a report of 221 food pantries in a major city, Houston, Texas. There's 221 food pantries. When we ran this report, there were actually only 3 that were open on Sunday. And these are questions I never would have thought to ask. And then as we started looking at the data, we realized this data is actually very important to community leaders. So maybe you're a family foundation and you're looking to fund programs for people in need that need food. One of the requirements that you can make now is that we will fund your food pantry, but you should be open on Sunday. The other thing we're starting to see is real-time demand by location. So if you see concentrations of searches in a particular area, you can react to it. So maybe you're seeing a bunch of searches for a dental clinic. So that would allow community leaders to actually think about where they plan the next dental clinic. Or some communities actually have dental vans where a dentist will ride around and they'll park their van in certain neighborhoods and let people in the neighborhood know about it. So I talked about the problem finding services, and that's our approach to actually fixing that problem, and we're starting to see some early results. Most US cities have at least 100 programs, and we're expanding beyond that. But now that you find the program, the other part of that maze is actually getting enrolled, and that's a much larger problem that we're tackling, but it will take a very long time. There's a lot of reasons why it's complicated to get enrolled. A lot of donors, foundations, or even government programs through the legislative process require very detailed amounts of information. They require things like copies of your identity, driver's licenses, passports, whatever it may be. They require proof of income, all sorts of things. That process is cumbersome, so what they end up doing is they end up asking all of those questions on a 20 to 25-page application. So keep in mind, you're stressed out. Maybe you're looking for housing. The last thing you want to do is fill out a 25-page application. But a lot of times, the agency's hands are tied, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Another problem with that expensive process, it's not only annoying to the people that are trying to get help, it's also very expensive to the agencies that are processing those applications. Our estimate is that around $70 is spent every time somebody applies for what I call a human service. That's filing, postage, data entry, and generally, maybe answering questions. So we're starting to see some not-for-profit organizations that are piloting different ways of going about it. Maybe you do genuinely need to answer 21 pages worth of questions in order to satisfy your legislature or funders, but you don't need them all right away, right? So, for example, this agency actually requires more information, but they are standing up a very simple way of getting enrolled in order to save the aggregate amount of time. So if they're able to move an applicant onto the next step of the process, that actually saves the applicant frustration, but also saves the agency money on the process of processing those applications. So why read 21 pages when you know on page 2 that this person already doesn't qualify? So you see sort of the process we're trying to do. Another area of anxiety is once you apply for a human service, you don't always get an answer right away. So most of us, maybe we apply for a credit card at Banana Republic or whatever it is. The situation, the answer is actually instantaneous. But when you apply for human service programs, sometimes it can take a week, sometimes it can take a month, sometimes it can take 3 months if there's a waiting list. So there's a lot of anxiety for the person who's actually trying to get enrolled into that program. Now, they don't want to bother by calling the agency every day. They might feel bad about it. Imagine if you had to make a phone call every time you checked your email if you were waiting for an email from somebody. So what some agencies are starting to do, here's a housing agency in Austin, they're actually allowing the applicants in real time to go check the status of their own application online. So that way, they don't have to call the agency. The agency saves money because they're not actually answering those calls. But then the applicant can say, hey, what's the status? Did you forget about me? And sometimes the agency did, and they maybe misplaced the paper. And then what's actually pretty interesting is that executive directors, by digitizing this onboarding process, are actually starting to be able to see reports in real time. For example, they can run reports and they can have access to data that shows, hey, 10% of our applicants were approved. You can run that by race, ethnicity, all sorts of different things. But also, what people are starting to do, executive directors are starting to manage customer service metrics. If you think about it, what if we managed customer service the same way in human service programs, either government or charitable programs, as we did for private, how long it takes to buy a car or to buy a house. And this agency, they're improving steadily the days it takes to make a decision, really trying to add dignity to the process. I want to share a final story. These are my parents. I took this picture shortly after I went away to college, and it's just kind of an example on kind of how families tend to rally. My mom got mad at my dad once, and again, she was 48 probably at the time, and he did something, who knows what it was, but she left. And my mom, pretty straight and narrow. She didn't drink alcohol, but she got mad. She goes out the front door, says, I'm gonna go get a beer. And my dad said, well, honey, you can't. You're on all sorts of medicine for your seizures. You're not allowed to have alcohol. She goes, well, I want a beer. And so my dad goes, I don't know what to tell her. She definitely can't have alcohol because there's side effects. So there I was in high school, and I said, oh, Dad, why don't you go get some near beer? And for those that aren't aware, what near beer is it's non-alcoholic beer. Seems pretty pointless to me until this actually happened. But so my dad went to the store and he bought a 6-pack of near beer without my mom knowing, and he brought back his brother and his sister-in-law. And my dad put the 6-pack of near beer in a brown paper bag. I'm sure he explicitly asked that. Goes into the back room freezer, puts it in there, gets her a big mug, pours her a glass of near beer, sets a salt shaker out. And my mom and dad and my aunt and uncle sat and played euchre. And my mom, was putting her salt into onto the napkin so the beer didn't stick to the napkin, and had a great time. And so she got up after she was almost done with her beer. My dad said, honey, where are you going? And she goes, I'm just gonna go get another beer. He goes, oh, no, don't worry, I'll get it for you. My dad didn't want to get caught in this big scheme. So he went to the freezer and he got another near beer and he poured it and had a great time. So we rallied. We didn't know what we were doing. We rallied through this situation, and my mom is still alive. She lives in Austin, Texas, and my two sisters and I look after her, and she interacts with her grandkids and things like that. Since I started this project, so many people told me their stories, and I just became convinced that everybody sort of has something at some point. Maybe not everybody. Some of us are very lucky. It'd be great if there was a situation where we add more dignity to the process. So I think what we can all work on together going forward is how do we move from this situation to this situation? So if you're working a nonprofit, or maybe you're an executive director there, or maybe you donate to nonprofits, or whatever it may be, as you're developing your procedures for getting enrolled, design dignity into every step. Because if you'll do that, it'll not only empower the seekers, the people in need, but it'll also help your organization run more efficiently. Thank you very much.